are. Good morning. Good morning. Morning, daughter. My name's David. Oh, it is. Thank goodness for that. That's correct. And this is what Sundays are made for. Yeah, being together as the family of God in this place on a lovely day. And I'm sure you want to get out into the sunshine. So just give me 30 minutes of your time and we'll be out there. Summer has arrived, as you can see. For this week, anyway. So, which famous person from history would you most like to be related to? Shout out your suggestion. Wesley, sort of John or Charles Wesley, one of the Methodist founders. Thank you for that. Nelson Mandela, down here at the front. Wow, yeah. Any other ideas? Florence Nightingale. That's a nice suggestion, isn't it? Yeah, wow. These names are popping up. I was giving it a little bit of thought, and I thought, well, I think I'd like to be related to somebody with a fairly grand name, and I thought of William the Conqueror, because I thought, well, I'd like to be called David the Conqueror. I mean, it's better than David the Loser, isn't it, really? Because I realised I'm not very good on history, but I think he was born in France. Now, that's okay, because the Olympics are in Paris. So I think we can get away with that. So, yeah. Anyway, don't call me David the Conqueror afterwards, please. It wouldn't be appropriate. Now, this links a little bit to one of my favourite TV programmes, which is on the screen now, and it's called Who Do You Think You Are? You might have seen it, where they look into the family history, the ancestors of celebrities. Actually, I was very pleased to see when I checked it out, it says, new series coming, summer 2024. So a whole new series of new celebrities, which excites me. I'm fascinated by when they look back into people's lives and they do all that family research and find all sorts of things. I think there was a great program, actually, which featured Bear Grylls. That name you might know, he's a Christian. He's quite an adventurer, does all sorts of crazy things. And I think they discovered that he was related to Robert the Bruce, which was rather appropriate. Now, I mean, that would be quite something to be related to somebody like that. But it is true, isn't it, that family history research can throw up some, what should we say, embarrassing surprises when you look back in history. And I've got to stand here and share with you something that's a little bit embarrassing from my own family research. I looked into my father's side a few years back. My father was Eric Roy Taverner. His father, my grandfather, was Albert Taverner. His father was George Taverner, born in 1853. And his father, I thought when I would have looked into the research and looked at all the documentation, might have been sort of Fred Taverner or something like that. But there was no record of that father. But there was a Hannah Taverner. Now, I hope you're beginning to put the pieces of the jigsaw together here. There was a Hannah Taverner who was the daughter of Daniel and Leah Taverner. And so I quickly realized that what happened was that Hannah Taverner didn't marry. And so her descendants were still Taverners and kept the surname. But she was, what should we say? She had a child out of wedlock. That's, I think, what you used to say. And so if you think about it, that means that my surname shouldn't really be Taverner. My family's names shouldn't be Taverner. So Lois, for example, could have been Lois Holland in a church like this. Or Lois Greeno. Now, that would have been awkward, wouldn't it? But so it was a bit of a surprise, I've got to tell you. It was a bit of a surprise. And, to think that my great-great-great-grandmother had an illegitimate child. And the more I read the Bible, the more I realize that the Bible is full of people who had all sorts of stuff going on in their lives. They weren't perfect people. I mean, just think about the last few women of the Bible we've been talking about. Eve. Steve started the series with Eve, and then Sarah, and then last week Howard was talking about Hagar. So these weren't perfect people, were they? And that is kind of an encouragement to me. And we use that phrase, a skeleton in the cupboard. You've heard that phrase, haven't you? Where there's something from your sort of past that you'd prefer really for people not to know too much about. Bit of an embarrassment if it were known. Well, the amazing thing is that even Jesus had skeletons in his cupboard. And so as we continue this sort of summer series on women of the Bible, we're going to be looking at Rachel. This is this week's woman of the Bible, Rachel from the Old Testament. And I've called her a desperate housewife. Now, if you've seen the TV series, you'll kind of know where I'm coming from. But that is sort of one way of summing up Rachel's life. I'm going to put on the screen now Jesus' family tree. So if you were to look into Jesus' family history, I've got to stand over here, have I, or whatever, you'll see that on the top left, you'll see Hagar is mentioned, Abraham's wife, and then Sarah. Yeah, they're at the top of that screen. So we've already explored those. But bearing in mind that in the New Testament, in Luke's Gospel, Jesus' family tree, Jesus' sort of lineage goes back to Adam. In Matthew's Gospel, which is more Jewish, it goes back to Abraham. So bottom of the screen, bottom left here, you'll see Jesus, who ultimately was descended from David, who was descended through Judah, whose mother was Leah, who, funnily enough, I've mentioned in another context, whose husband was Jacob, and then we go back to Abraham. Now, we're focusing on Rachel, here they're on the right-hand side, and you'll soon see that she wasn't actually a direct descendant of Jesus. But her life, I think, throws up some skeletons in the cupboard. Now, a couple of things. First of all, we've mentioned Hagar, we've mentioned Sarah, we've mentioned Leah, we've mentioned Rachel. 12 sons, as you'll see, they're sort of the wrong way around, aren't they? Going from the left-hand side, Dan, to the right-hand side. So Jacob had 12 sons and one daughter. I always thought, poor Dinah. 12 brothers and one sister. What must that have been like? How on earth did Jacob remember all those birthdays, for a start? But yeah, interesting that God didn't choose Rachel to be a direct descendant of Jesus. I'm going to put up another image, which I think will help us a little bit more. It's quite a colourful one, this. Just to make it clear that Jacob had two wives, Leah and Rachel. Now, what do they say? Don't do this at home. He had two wives, Rachel and Leah, and they had two servants, Zilpah and Bilhah. And as you'll see, all four women gave Jacob his 12 sons, including the one with the multicolored coat that looks like the angel of the north, Joseph. The question is, in what order did these children come into the world? It's not clear. You'd think it was, left to right. But it's not quite clear from that picture which order they came into the world. And the thing we need to remember, if we're focusing on Rachel, if Rachel bore some of those sons, then what can we learn from her example, her not so good example actually, as she was struggling to have children? Now, to help us, we're going to have some words from the Bible, but I've asked Nikki to come and join us on the stage here for a second, for a couple of reasons. You may not know this about Nikki. Nikki has a real passion for family history, don't you? You go into it in great detail. Come and join us over here, and we can probably take that off for a second. Because, is it your own family history that you've researched?
Yes.
And you go on, yeah. And you were telling me You were telling me, sorry, I'll tell you what, I'll do it that way around. You were telling me you've just done some research into some of the names.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah, go on.
I do actually have one ancestor who must have been very into the Bible. He had 10 children. The daughters were Mary, Martha, Anne, and Hannah, which were not unusual names for the day, but the sons were called Shadrach, Azariah, Aaron, Joseph, Elijah, and Elisha. So quite names to live up to.
They knew their Bible, and that was when? What sort of century?
The Father Thomas was born in about 1705, so about 100 years after the King James Bible came out. I did look it up.
Yeah. No, good point. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that you've got a new job.
Yes.
And this is something we want to praise God about. So just tell us briefly about the job.
So on the 2nd of September, I will be starting work at a secondary school in St Helens, working as the librarian and academic mentor. So supporting kids to get them into reading and encourage them with to get a love of reading, but also supporting kids that maybe are struggling with their reading to get them up to speed.
Yeah, and that's a real answer to prayer, isn't it? And brilliant news. So as Nikki reads just a few selected verses actually from Genesis 29 and 30, which we've picked out, put yourself in Rachel's shoes, okay? We're focusing on Rachel this week, so put yourself in Rachel's shoes as you hear what's going on in this family.
Keep up, this gets complicated.
We'll put the family history on shot on the screen as well.
The Lord saw that Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. So the Lord made it possible for Leah to have children, but Rachel did not have any children. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben. Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Simeon. Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Levi. Then Leah gave birth to another son. She named him Judah. Then Leah stopped having children. Rachel saw that she was not giving birth to children for Jacob, so she envied her sister Leah. Rachel said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her. He said, "Can I do what only God can do? He is the one who has kept you from having children." Then Rachel said, "Here is my slave girl, Bilhah. Have physical relations with her so she can give birth to a child for me. Then I can have my own family through her." So Rachel gave Bilhah, her slave girl, to Jacob as a wife. She became pregnant and gave Jacob a son. So Rachel named this son Dan. Bilhah became pregnant again and gave Jacob a second son. Rachel said, "I have struggled hard with my sister and I have won." So she named that son Naphtali. Leah saw that she had stopped having children. So she gave her slave girl, Zilpah, to Jacob as a wife. Then Zilpah had a son. Leah said, "I am lucky." So she named her son Gad. Zilpah gave birth to another son. Leah said, "I'm very happy. Now women will call me happy." So she named her son Asher. Leah became pregnant again. She gave birth to a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me what I paid for because I gave my slave girl to my husband." So Leah named her son Issachar. Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to a sixth son. She said, "God has given me a fine gift. Now surely Jacob will honor me because I have given him 6 sons." So she named the son Zebulun. Then God remembered Rachel and answered her prayer. God made it possible for her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She said, God has taken away my shame. She named him Joseph. Rachel said, I wish the Lord would give me another son.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Nikki, very much indeed. What a family. It makes EastEnders seem quite tame, doesn't it, really? Talk about 6 wives of Henry VIII, but Jacob and his 12 sons, all sounds very nice and lovely, as if they're one happy family. But as you've sort of gathered, I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And that key verse in Genesis chapter 30 and verse 1, which we'll just put up, which is, Rachel saw that she was not giving birth to children for Jacob. She envied her sister, Leah. Rachel said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. What a statement, isn't it? So envy. That's what we're going to be thinking a little bit about. Because she was envious of her older sister for having all these children. And she even used her servant in a kind of revenge. Things in her mind were getting out of control. You can imagine the sort of frustration that would have been simmering in her heart as the months went by. And if, by my calculation, generally babies take about 9 months, don't they, to happen. So when you multiply that up, that's a lot of waiting and a lot of frustration and a lot of simmering. And of course, don't forget, Rachel was the pretty one. It's a bit like Cinderella. Leah was you could say, the ugly sister. Yes, exactly. But Rachel didn't quite marry the prince as quickly as she wanted to, because Jacob had to work for his uncle for years until that was possible. So there was all that going on. And in a sense, when you think about it for a second, Rachel was clearly frustrated. I mean, you could hear it in that outburst, give me a child. She was obviously, because you heard at the end there that she said that you've taken away my shame. So she had been a disgraced woman in that society, not to be able to, give a son to a husband would have been a disgrace. Others would have talked behind her back. The net curtains would have been twitching. She was also this desperate housewife. For years, the years passed by, and she didn't have a child. But then when she did have a son, you heard at the end, she named him Joseph, and the reason she named him Joseph was because she then wanted another son straight away. So she wasn't happy with what was going on. And I think from my investigations, actually it was about another 8 years or thereabouts before her second son, Benjamin, was born. You have to flick forward in Genesis to chapter 35 to verses 16, where this is the end of Rachel's life. So she's been living with all of this frustration, all of this envy in her heart. Even though she's got Joseph, she's still wanting another son. And it says Jacob and his group left Bethel, their moving location, they're moving from where they've been. Before they came to Ephrath, Rachel began giving birth to her baby. This was her second child. But she was having much trouble with this birth. When Rachel's nurse saw this, she said, "Don't be afraid, Rachel. You are giving birth to another son." But as she lay dying, she named the boy Son of My Suffering. But Jacob called him Benjamin, which means right-hand son or favorite son. Rachel gave birth to the son, but she died. So even right at the very end, that envy has eaten away at her. And imagine growing up, that boy being called Son of My Suffering. Wow. So, what a tragic ending, in a sense. And so the root cause of Rachel's problem is envy. Envy. She let it ruin her life. And, if we're not clear, envy is quickly defined as a feeling of wanting what someone else has. But do you know what envy looks like? This is what it looks like. You'll be thinking, what on earth is that? Well, if you're a fan of the Inside Out animation, then you'll know that this is a new emotion in the life of young Ridley. Little Ridley is someone who is the sort of star of the film, Inside Out, and the film is about all her emotions. And these are some of the new emotions in the in Inside Out 2, version 2, as well as some of the new ones. And they've all got personalities. And so these personalities, which are these emotions, make a feature in the film. Envy there at the top, embarrassment. Ennui, you'll see halfway down on the left-hand side. Ennui. You'll have to look that up, won't you? You don't know what that emotion is. Well, I didn't actually. But that's an interesting emotion. But yeah, envy at the top. Now let's just put envy back on the screen for a second. And I want to ask you a couple of questions about two aspects of what you can see. First of all, what do you notice about the colour? Green. Though it does look a bit turquoisey to me. But anyway, yes. Green, because we talk about being green with envy, don't we? And also, what about the size of her eyes? Big. Because we talk about our sort of eyes popping out of our head, don't we? When it comes to being envious. So I think that's two reasons why envy in Inside Out looks like that. And I want to just reflect on that for a second, because I did actually look up where that phrase green with envy comes from. It's a funny phrase, green with envy. I did my research. Well, I Googled it. And it tells you that long ago, the Greeks, and I think to some extent the Romans, associated a green complexion on someone's face with sickness and fear and even jealousy and envy. Because there is, when envy eats away at you, there's an overproduction, and forgive me mentioning the medical term, there's an overproduction of bile in the stomach. That's put you off your lunch, isn't it, Janet? And so physically, when you stop and think about it, physically you can be affected by the effect of these emotions. I mean, when envy becomes kind of rampant in your mind and in your life, then we've got a problem. And, we have this phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. I've always thought, well, who do the Joneses keep up with? This doesn't make sense to me. But so the point is, though, when you think about envy, I mean, let me ask you a few questions which you don't have to answer. When we look at other people, are we envious about what they have, what they look like, how successful they are, where they live, how they live, what they do, where they go on holiday, that they can go on holiday, that they don't seem to have any problems, that they live life to the full, that they have lots of friends, that they have friends that don't want to be your friends, that their friends are the best friends any friends could have. It starts getting ridiculous, doesn't it, when you stop and think about it? But that's what envy does to you. And put it another way, in a modern world that we live in, has social media helped us control our envy towards others or made it worse? Are we healthier by being bombarded with adverts and comparisons and likes and AI-generated perfection? So the question is, what can we learn from Rachel's life about the dangers of envy? And I think there are 3 warnings from her example, and that's why her story is in the Bible. The Bible is always warts and all. And the first one is this, that envy will destroy your health. It's a strong thing to say. I talked about her being a desperate housewife, but she went on to become an unfulfilled mother, did she not? And actually ended up as a bitter soul. And I think when you think about envy getting to you to the extent that it's affecting your complexion, affecting your body, then unlike, on a packet of cigarettes, it used to say, there was this government health warning that said, smoking can damage your health. Well, I think there's plenty of evidence that it does. But what the Bible is saying is that envy will damage your health if you let it get out of control. And a way I want to help you remember how important this is a memory verse. We're going to put a memory verse up here, and I want you to sort of say this together and really put your effort into it, because it's an amazing verse. It's from Proverbs 14, verse 30, and hopefully you can all see it. And let's say it together. Okay, here we go. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Let's do it again, okay? A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And you can say it like that if you want. Now, one thing to remember about Proverbs is that this might surprise you, but it's important to remember, is that Proverbs isn't full of promises where A guarantees B. You've got to read the book of Proverbs quite carefully, but what Proverbs is, it's full of general truths, truisms, you might say, things that generally are true. The reason I say that is because, you could look at that verse and think, envy will always rot my bones, but that's not the point. It's trying to help us understand that in the round of life, it can cause that amount of damage. So I think that's the first warning, that envy will destroy your life. So be careful. And this is a serious warning, isn't it, from Rachel's life. The second thing, warning number 2, is envy will destroy your relationships. You think, my goodness me, this is a jolly message for a summer Sunday afternoon, isn't it? But, we've got to hear the truth. We've got to hear the truth. Envy will destroy your relationships. I mean, in the story of Rachel, if you read her story in Genesis 29 and 30, clearly she wasn't buddies with her sister, and it got worse. She actually stole her father's pagan gods when they were moving, and then pretended that she couldn't reveal the truth and show them to her uncle, who was mad as a hatter, because it was, I'll use this phrase carefully, it was that time of the month. So things started to get out of hand. I mean, this is the relationship with her father that then had broken down. And that's not good. In fact, there's a verse in Psalm 37, verse 8. And Psalm 37 is a fantastic psalm to reflect on about this whole subject, actually. Psalm 37, verse 8 says, stay away from anger and revenge. Keep envy far from you, for it only leads you into lies. I mean, these are stark warnings to us, aren't they? That something as, we maybe haven't thought much about envy, but it's that serious. So there's a little warning. And then the third warning, because we'll come on to a solution in a second. The third warning, in learning from Rachel's life about the dangers of envy, bearing in mind that, she didn't believe in God's plan for her family, and she tried to manipulate things, you remember, with this servant girl. She lost her faith in God. So warning number 3 is this: envy will destroy your faith. Strong words. But, I use the word warning. Those of us who drive, there are warning signs on the roads, aren't there, which you need to follow. And if you don't follow the warning signs, then you're going to have an accident or something. So these are warnings in the Bible from Rachel's life. It's things, let's be honest, that are a bit embarrassing about a descendant of Jesus. It's a skeleton in his cupboard, really, that you don't really want to talk about. But this is what happened, and we need to learn from it. But just a couple of verses more to make the point, and I'm hoping underlining this, that we need to take this seriously. So in James chapter 3, verse 16, this is what the Bible says will happen if envy is left to fester. Where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. And then in 1 Peter 2, verse 1, pointing out that envy is a serious problem, not just a cartoon character. The Bible tells us to deal with it when Peter himself says, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. So, I hope I've sort of made it clear, and I've been challenged, as I'm sure you have, by the seriousness of the problem with envy. The question is, what do we need to do? What is the cure for envy? You know, I don't want envy to make me ill. Who wants to be full of bile? Ooh. I don't want envy to leave me crushed on my deathbed, as Rachel was, really. I don't want envy to take away my faith. So let's go back to our memory verse. I hope you've remembered it. And I want it to be a memory verse for you this week, because I think if you keep saying it, try and remember it, and say it this week, then we'll learn something from it. So let's just say it again together. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Yeah. But what I'm going to do is just make the point that that was BC, because it's Old Testament, and we're now AD. So I'm going to just tweak it slightly, because even though it says a heart at peace gives life, from a Christian point of view, there's more to it. And I would say we need to say a heart at peace with Christ is what we're talking about. This is an important subject for us to grasp, I think, and it's important for us to understand what we're talking about when we're saying a heart at peace with Christ. I think you probably already knew the answer, because if I said to you, what is the exact opposite of wanting what others have? You would probably say, being content with what you have. If I was saying to you, what is the exact opposite of wanting to be like someone else? You would probably say, being content with who you are. But it's being content in Christ, isn't it, as Christians? That's the yardstick. That's who we are wanting to follow and have chosen to follow in our lives. And I want to, I suppose, illustrate this with mentioning a guy who gave up his career as a successful lawyer. And this is what he wrote about how he had dealt with envy. Bear in mind that he'd been in prison many times. He'd been physically whipped, beaten, and stoned. He'd been a man overboard at sea. He'd faced danger from all sides, rivers, robbers, religious maniacs. He'd been starved of food and shivered at night from being exposed to the cold, and he stared death in the face on numerous occasions. And this is what he wrote. I don't have a sense of needing anything personally. I've learned by now to be quite content whatever my circumstances. I'm just as happy with little as with much as with little. I found the recipe for being happy, whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am. This is the cure for envy. A heart at peace with Christ, which Rachel didn't have. We sing some powerful truths when we come together, and there's a song that we sometimes sing, and we're going to sing it in a few minutes, called Graves into Gardens. But there's some verses, some words at the beginning of that song, which I hope, as you sing them in a few minutes, will perhaps resonate even more clearly. And we're going to put them on the screen just as a reminder of what you'll be singing in a second, where the writer of this song, Graves into Gardens, says this: I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. I don't know what this has stirred in you this morning. I'd like to pray with you in a second, and there will be others in the corner who would be lovely, who would be very happy to pray with you as well. Our prayer team are ready, because if this is something that you need to do business with God about, then today is the best day to do that, yeah?